Let's start with a question you're probably not supposed to ask about famous outlaws. What did it actually times smell? Times like right there, at the moment of death. Forget the movie version, the slow fade, the tragic lighting, the outlaw's last breath coming clean in some kind of poetic haze. In reality, death by gunfire, in a muddy ditch or slumped in a battered car is not cinematic. It's physical, it's messy, and above all, it's full of unmistakable, unavoidable odors and sensations we almost never hear about. So, what was the real sensory aftermath of Babyface Nelson's final moments? Not the legend, not the newsreel, but the scene itself. Blood, cold body, and the air thick with something you'd never want bottled as a cologne. The way outlaw deaths are usually shown, both in old press stories and popular movies, leans hard into drama and tragedy, sometimes even a kind of strange, heroic cleanliness. Period newspapers built up the story of Nelson's end as a dramatic showdown. Gangsters versus the FBI, bullets flying, then the curtain falls and the bodies are carted away. Quick and sanitized. On screen, Babyface Nelson is often portrayed as dying, almost artfully, a little too clean for all the violence that's just unfolded. That's the image most people carry, the gangster sprawled in his last pose, the hat fallen off, the blood discreetly hidden. The moment frozen for legend and photographers. It's a scene built for myth, not for noses or nerves. But here's the first reality check. In all the period news accounts and police documentation available, there are no direct, contemporary descriptions of what the scene actually smelled like, or how the physical aftermath affected the senses. There are no surviving details on the odor in the car, the scent of blood in the muddy ditch, or the staleness of the death air itself. The records give us times, bullets, names, and aftermath logistics, but not a single clear report of the sensory experience. That means, for what it was really like to stand there with Nelson's body, nose to air, boots in mud, we're missing any first-hand description. So here's how we're going to approach this. Because nobody at the scene left a direct account of the smell, the feel, the bodily reality. This is not an eyewitness report. It's a plausible reconstruction, built from medical knowledge, period context, and what would have been physically present. Every detail about the stench, the texture of blood, the numbing cold, and the decay is an informed inference, not a documented, quoted fact. We're going to walk through the likely scene, as close to actual as possible, but always grounded in the limits of what's supported. If you want the truth about outlaw death, it means leaving the movies at the door and bracing yourself for the physical facts, no matter how uncomfortable. This is what we know, as close as medical and physical inference can bring us. After the shooting, Nelson's body was left riddled with gunshot wounds, his blood soaking through clothes and seeping out onto the interior of the Ford. He didn't die instantly. Trauma medicine suggests he bled out over the course of hours, the blood first gushing, then oozing. Warm at first, and then turning cold as his body cooled and circulation stopped. The result, a mess of half-dried, half-congealed blood pooling in the footwell, soaking into the floor mats, staining the seat, and pooling beneath the body itself. Imagine, for a moment, that car, its doors closed, windows streaked, interior filling with the heavy metallic scent of fresh blood. Then the slow, sticky chill as everything inside loses its warmth. Now, let's take stock of the inside of that car. Again, not from direct odor reports, But by reconstructing the scene through what's known about period materials and the after effects of trauma, you have 1930s upholstery, a kind of wool blend fabric, now damp from blood and grime, not at all like sleek modern synthetics. There's a wool blanket used to cover or move the body, which by this time is soaked and smeared. Mud from the roadside, tracked in on boots or transferred from Nelson being dragged, adds a wet, earthy funk. All of this, the wool, the mud, the blood, held in close quarters, windows fogged or slightly cracked but not enough to clear the air. What you'd get is a thick, layered stench, metallic blood, wet wool, decaying mud, old car, and the unmistakable undertone of something gone badly. Physically wrong. No one at the perfume counter is selling this one, but the real sensory punch comes from the bodily fluids beyond just blood. In a violent death like Nelson's, trauma, medicine, and historical context both point to the likelihood of involuntary release. Sweat saturates clothing and skin. Urine leaks as control slips away in those agonizing final moments. And in many cases, the stress and collapse of the body trigger the release of feces as well. These reactions aren't unique to Nelson. They're common wherever people die, in sudden, brutal ways. Mix that with the sweat of fear, the dirt from the roadside, the coppery blood, and you're left with an odor profile that's far from just smelly. It's a choking, organic assault. Again, we don't have a direct period nose witness, but trauma medicine and the logistics of the scene make this a reasonable, if unpleasant, inference. The car itself is parked at the edge of a cold, late November road. The night air outside sharp enough to sting, but inside the air is thick and unmoving. When Nelson's body is finally dumped, it lands in a shallow ditch just off the roadside, mud sucking its shoes, cold dampness rising from below. The ditch is exposed to the open air, but in those first hours after the body is discovered, the overpowering stench lingers, blood, sweat, urine, and that shock of cold all mixing in the early winter chill. This is not the clean, clipped ending of a movie outlaw. It's raw, ugly, and as physical as death gets. Cold weather delays rot. Odor is mainly blood and fluids. In the hours right after Nelson's body was dumped in that roadside ditch, the full horror of human decay hadn't kicked in, at least not in the way most people imagine. Early decomposition can begin surprisingly fast, but the biting late November chill would have slowed things down. That means, at the moment of discovery, the dominant stench wasn't the heavy, sweet reek of advanced rot. Instead, the immediate assault on the senses came from something else. The sharp, metallic tang of fresh and drying blood, the sourness of sweat, the acrid edge of urine and other bodily fluids released at death. The earth itself, cold, damp, sucking at shoes, added a muddy undertone, but the overwhelming note wasn't decay yet. It was the raw, pungent stink of a body freshly torn open by violence, with the cold air doing just enough to keep true putrefaction at bay, but not to spare anyone the shock of what death actually smells like. You might expect something cinematic, a dramatic waft of death that's somehow mythic, almost poetic. But the truth is, the sensory horror here was brutally physical. It was the metallic, almost coppery smell of blood, still not entirely congealed, mixed with the sour tang of panic sweat and the unmistakable ammonia of urine. The cold damp didn't cleanse the air. It just gave everything a wet, chilly weight that made the stench cling to your nostrils and your clothes. Mud clung to every surface, and the wool of Nelson's coat and blankets trapped the odors deep inside their fibers. The reality was closer to a butcher's back room in winter than any outlaw legend. Metallic, sour, cold, damp, and rank. No music, no slow fade to black. Just the relentless, inescapable facts of biology. And just to be totally clear, nobody's confusing this for a perfume ad. There was no trace of Chanel No. 5 drifting around that ditch, unless Chanel started bottling blood, urine, wool, and November mud. The only base notes on offer were the ones no one ever wants to experience outside of a crime scene or a morgue. If anyone had tried to air out the car or the shallow ditch, they'd have found the stink was stubborn, crammed into every fiber and pore. It's important to stress, no direct period report actually describes the smell at Nelson's death scene. There's no coroner's note or policeman's diary entry giving us a sensory play-by-play. The sensory immersion, the blood, the cold, the fluids, the wool, all comes from what would almost certainly have been present, not from anyone's eyewitness account. So why don't we ever see this version of outlaw death, messy, cold, and nauseating in the stories we tell or the movies we watch? Why is the real physical aftermath of Babyface Nelson's last stand always left out, replaced by fade-outs and swelling soundtracks? The answer isn't just about taste or censorship. It's almost as if the myth itself needs to keep us at arm's length from the reality, because the true aftermath is uncomfortable to even imagine, let alone show. If you picture the shot-up car, the soaked wool, the stench, and the evidence of a desperate escape, you're forced to confront what outlaw death actually meant for bodies, not just reputations. The legend prefers its martyrs and monsters tidy, their endings sealed in black and white, all the uncomfortable details quietly swept into the ditch along with the body. Based on everything known about how press coverage and legend evolved after Nelson's death, it's a reasonable inference that the persistence of the tidy, almost heroic outlaw myth depends on leaving out that hideous, sensory truth. The story that took hold, the one with gun smoke and headlines, but without the stink, the shivers, the stains, survives precisely because it omits the parts that would force people to turn away in disgust. The true sensory horror contradicts the legend's clean narrative. You can't have a glamorous gangster saga if you admit that the final scene smelled like rot, iron, urine, and wet wool. The movies and the newspapers stuck to what played well: gunfire, chase, capture, all the drama without the aftermath. Maybe they figured no audience wanted to be reminded that hero or villain, everyone ends up a body in the mud, leaking into their clothes. It isn't that nobody cared, it's that the details made the legend impossible to sell. And by forgetting the physical reality, the blood, the stench, the body's collapse, the way death lingers in fabric and dirt, we lose something vital about what outlaw life and death actually were. Stripped of the sensory mess, the story becomes a shadow play, flat and weightless. The real cost of these violent lives and the real horror of their endings gets erased. What's left is just a movie scene, not the wrenching, bodily truth of what it feels like when history actually happens to flesh and bone. So when we look back at the legends of gangster death, it's worth remembering. The cinematic endings are a cover. The real story is physical, messy, cold, and unforgettable for anyone unlucky enough to catch the smell. Myth polishes away what the body leaves behind, but it's that sensory punch, the stink and the stain, that tells us what outlaw death really meant.